Thor's is him. Hello, Reformed mythologist Nate Morgan-Locke here with a video about Makoto Yukimura's Vinland Saga on Netflix. So why am I looking at it? Well, I made a video about Twilight of the Gods, and lots of people referenced this show in the comments. So I started watching it, and wow. I've really enjoyed it so far, thanks to all of you who've encouraged me to see it. Anyway, I've only seen the first 4 episodes so far, so there's a lot more of it that fans of the show might already have seen, but I wanted to do a quick video to share some of my initial thoughts. Before we get into some of the episodes themselves, I want to make a few points about the historical and cultural issues around the show. So it's based on actual historical documents, the Vinland Sagas from the early Middle Ages. The Greenland Saga and the Saga of Eric the Red, which you can check out online to see how accurate the lore is. If you want to hear Britain's favourite history podcast hosts talk about this stuff, you might like to check out the Rest is History podcast episode about the sagas with Tom Holland, Dominic Sandbrook, and they're joined by fellow British historian Eleanor Rosamond Barraclough. These people with their unnecessarily long names, hey? She knows a lot about these texts and the Old Norse language because she studied them intently, and she's even written several books about it all. If you want to read them, please be my guest. Anyway, I was reading a section early on, and there's quite a lot of genealogy at the beginning, which, if you're familiar with the Bible, is pretty cool because several of the books of the Old Testament contain extensive genealogy, and Matthew's Gospel, which starts the New Testament, begins with the genealogy of Jesus. But genealogies aren't typically very interesting unless you know the story. The other area which is interesting to me outside of the saga narratives themselves is the wider history of competing mythologies that was taking place in Northern Europe at the time. If you're interested in the Christianization of Scandinavia, may I recommend this video from Gavin Ortland at Truth Unites. He helpfully debunks the idea that the evangelization of Scandinavia was just a political power play. And the third question I've had about the show is about the Japanese influence. The Vinland Saga was originally a manga written by Makoto Yukimura, and he is credited as the creator of the Netflix show too. I'm not sure just how much 21st century Japanese understanding of the honor code was being written into a medieval Norse story. How much of this is a mixture of Edo period Japan ideas about samurai honor, and how much of it is about Christian chivalric codes from the time of Charlemagne and the Crusades, and how much of it is based upon the Viking attitudes towards honor and duty. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that some of that will come out through the other episodes of the show, but suffice it to say that I am excited to see just how the Christian principles will rub up against the pagan attitudes. And it seems to me that the show does a pretty good job of feeling like a real anime and also feeling genuinely Norse and medieval at the same time. Anyway, with all that said, let's now get into the show itself. Here's a few things I enjoyed seeing. Number 1, Thor's. He's a central character, and I found him very interesting. Classic soldier/warrior turned farmer sort of stuff. Now, this might be the influence of Christianity early on. Has the message of Jesus changed Thor's heart? I think I've seen this film before. The Lord will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. That's from the Bible, that is. Anyway, I love a bit of the old reluctance of the former warrior to fight trope, and Thor's is very compelling as a character. But it's not really until episode 4, when he finally gets drawn into a battle, where we see that he's totally OP. You're always waiting for this kind of character to have to decide whether to engage or not. And that's what happens in episode 4, which is the conclusion to the Thor's story and sets up his son Thorfinn as the true main character. Thor's comes up against Askeladd's merry band of very violent men, and his right-hand man in particular, Bjorn, who has just eaten a berserker mushroom. That's pretty interesting. interesting. But Thor dispatches all of these men very easily and then challenges Askeladd, the boss, to a duel. This is played out like a chess match. We get to hear the thoughts of the men as they fight. But wait, to put it in the parlance of our times, Thor's is him, as the teenagers say. He shows mercy to his enemy, choosing not to kill him when he has the chance. But then comes the fatal attack. Thor's is taken out by the firing squad on the cliffs. The important thing is that Thorfinn has been watching all of this unfold, and it looks like the rest of the show will be about Thorfinn learning to walk in the path of his father. Number 2. I really enjoyed the Leif Erikson stuff. Leif Erikson, or Leif the Lucky, was a Viking explorer who's pretty much agreed to be the first non-American to go to America. Anyway, at one point he says he holds to the worship of Jesus Christ, for whom we drink wine. One particular line is, "The people of my homeland drink wine to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ." That's exactly the sort of thing I like to see in a cartoon. My father would share his mead with you, but there's a meaning to drinking wine. Cool. I'd love to see the meaning of drinking that wine being explored. Who knows? Number 3. The persecution of monks on the Faroe Islands, early in Season 1. Very interesting. Religious warring. Alright, I didn't particularly enjoy seeing this, but it's going to be very interesting to see how the religious wars unfold and how they're depicted in this show. Number 4. I enjoyed the references to Jogmundur, the dragon. Anyway, you know the Norse dragon serpent thing. Thor has a lot of fights with him in Norse mythology. Anyway, interesting to see where they take that in the show. I did enjoy seeing the reference. Number 5. I adored the manumission idea in episode 1, the freedom of the slave. Buying the freedom of a slave for a greatly inflated price, even though the slave dies almost immediately. This feels like a deeply Christian idea and sets up Thor's as a truly heroic character. It also reminded me of an illustration used by an American preacher named Paris Reedhead in a sermon called So Great a Salvation. This is really what I want to leave you with, because this part of the show was the thing that really excited me. Here's the illustration. It tells the story of a slave being bought at a greatly inflated price in order to be set free.
Here are your manumission papers. You are free. She said, I know. No, you paid twice as much for me as they've ever paid for anybody on that block. And you're giving me the, I don't believe it. He said, yes, these are your manumission papers, and he put them in her hand. And she said, stop, mister. Yes. Do you mean to say that you bought me to set me free? I said, yes, that's why I bought you, to set you free. Tears came up into eyes that hadn't known tears for a long time. The gift spilled over. Her face softened. And then she slipped down on her hands and knees. And she reached down and put her hands around those rough miner's boots. And then laid her cheek down on the toe of one of them. And through her tears she sobbed, oh, you bought me to set me free. You bought me to set me free. You paid more than has ever been paid before just to set me free. And then through her tears she looked up and said, oh, sir, all I want in life is to be your slave. You bought me to set me free.
So there we are. This salvation is the heart of the Christian message. And if you want to read more of the Christian story, but you're still very much into your Norse aesthetic, may I recommend reading the Heliand, which is a synthesis of the 4 biblical gospels about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, written in the 9th century and rendered with a whole Viking Saxon kind of vibe. I really enjoyed these first 4 episodes, and I will be watching the rest of Season 1 over the next few weeks. Thanks again and for your recommendation. But please do remember that media consumption is optional. You are under no obligation to watch Japanese manga turned anime Norse mythology shows on American streaming platforms. I'm Reformed Mythologist Nate Morganlock. I'm very glad you were here.